Right, so I'm Richard Hill. I've been a software developer for a long time, about 25 years I think it is now. That's me with my family in the top right corner. Husband to Helen, dad to Robin, Melody and Summer. About 25 kilograms ago I was pretty good on a bike, but not so much anymore. The middle photo is quite a momentous occasion because that's back in the 80s. I got my mum to dig this out of a family album. But that's me, the first day we got a computer in our house. And there's a drink for anyone at a bar of your choice to work out what game I'm playing there. I know what it is because I can tell, but I thought I'd throw that out to you guys. But that is quite an important moment because that kind of catalyst of getting a computer at home, an Atari computer, kicked off my career in computing. And I went from school doing an H&D in computer science, a computer science degree, and then I worked for a really cool company called Superscape, who did virtual reality software back in the 90s, and I worked there doing all sorts of really interesting things, working with some really good guys who knew, even to this day, I've rarely stepped up to see people who were like them. And I worked with them until the dot-com bubble burst in about 2000, 2001. Came back from the US, where I'd been based, setting up teams out there, and became a consultant contractor. And I've been doing that for the last 17 years. I remember that because Robin, our eldest, was born just at the time I decided to make that transition from to being a consultant. So that's meant I've worked in loads of different organisations now. Got Honda Formula One, Microsoft, RBS. It's been brilliant, but that leads me off into a conversation that I had with a mate of mine. He doesn't know this actually, that he's part of this presentation, but he said to me over lockdown, he said, "What are you? You know, are you just this contractor that goes in and sorts people's problems out?" And he really kind of emotionally punched me in the tummy because I was like, yeah, I'm not that sure anymore. And I went home and I really thought about what he'd said. And I thought, I want to create something. I'm right at this time now, I want to create something. And I had these 3 ideas going around my head and I wrote them down. And I'll quickly go over them, and they're free, by the way, so if you want to take up some of these ideas, then feel welcome. The first one was, it was a financial visualizer, it was a heat map, but done on phones. So the idea would be that you were interested in certain markets, and any markets that were dropping would be in red, any markets that were rising would be in green, and then you could click and drill down into the markets and see what was going on. I liked the idea, kind of limited kind of uptake. I didn't really see that there was a broad appeal. So I parked that idea. I still like it, but I've left it. The other one was something called Energy Notifier, and this was based around the idea that when there's too much energy in a power grid anywhere, well, let's stick with the UK. In the UK, the power companies get fined, okay? So one of the things they love to do is to get rid of energy in that situation, and they will pay you, okay, to use that energy. So think about, you know, if you want to just turn on an electric heater at that time, you'll get it for free because they will just give you that energy. Likewise, you could charge your electric car for free at that moment in time. And the idea of the Energy Notifier was to send out like a text message or a message to people and say, look, plug it in tonight. You get it for free. And if you're really good, you've got vehicle to grid, you can pump it back in again and get a double whammy. That's another topic. Sorry, I've got a form one slide there. So that's the second idea. Still wasn't super keen on it. I did develop it quite a bit. The third idea was GreenCloud, and this came about because I'd been working in different businesses. So I'd worked in a startup in Birmingham that did ANPR car parks. So they were using cameras to look at people's number plates and get you to go into the car park. But we did it all in the cloud with AWS. And then I also did a price change piece of software, transition digital thing at Sainsbury's. Again, all of this was a lot of processing done in AWS using Lambdas and primarily done overnight. And when you work in that kind of area, you start to learn about like just the whole ecosystem that's involved in cloud computing. And very quickly, I started to become aware of, the huge amounts of energy that cloud computing uses, and it's a real problem. So some statistics off that, Nature, the magazine nature.com, they've recently published an article on this, and they're stating that the worldwide use of data centers is enough energy to power smaller countries. And I find that phenomenal. I really struggle with that, to think that, cloud computing is absorbing all that energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere, and it's not always green. Sometimes it is, and it is getting better, but I'll get onto that as a separate topic. And then the next statistic that I might have to just check back on some notes here, but this one was to do with the UK. And what was it? Yeah, 12% of UK electricity consumption goes into data centers. And I'm just astonished that, we're using so much energy for cloud computing. It shouldn't be that much, I think. And this is where I started thinking about, how could we do something to kind of reduce that? Because I'd say the elephant in the room, but we're supposedly in like a climate emergency, right? So what can we do to kind of do something about that? So I think I can move on from me. That's a little bit about the problem, okay? Cloud computing, huge amounts of energy, and should add to that, 50% of that energy is just to keep things cool, so that they keep going. A couple of years ago, decided to invest in solar on our house and put a battery in the garage, right? Got a right telling off for it because it was quite expensive, and my wife quite rightly said, we could have a decent holiday with that, and you want to go and do that on the roof, and when are we going to actually get some money back? And I had to kind of just wing it for a bit. But then I started to realise we're not the only people who have decided to take this decision. And it's also been exacerbated recently with what's going on with the price cap and people being more careful about what they do with energy. The number of people now installing solar as a means to reduce and get some control over their energy use is really rocketing. And I then realised, I'm sat in front of this lovely computer to work with, but it's powered by renewable energy. Like, my house runs off the solar and stored energy 75%, 80% of the time. The only time it doesn't is when we plug the car in, which knackers things up because it's a hell of a lot of energy for a car. That then started me thinking about, is there a system that we can put together that could make use of people like me? And a bit of research that I did into this idea showed that there's 3.2 million people in the UK with similar systems of solar on their homes or battery storage who are looking after their own kind of power usage, who also potentially have got computers attached to that energy. And that is the basis of GreenCloud. All right? Now, I know this is going to be triggering lots of thoughts in your minds about, security, speed, all sorts of stuff, but we'll come on to that. And also, I don't have the answers to absolutely everything yet. This is I should mention, this is the first time I've ever publicly spoken about GreenCloud, so you're all very privileged to hear this. It's taken probably 15 months to get to this point, a lot of dead ends, but we've got something working. So that's, again, I'm not quite in sync with my slides, but that's really just showing, that there is renewable energy out there, and there are people with homes, a significant number, who are powered by renewable energy that we could tap into to do computing tasks. Right. How does GreenCloud work? So the way I've been demoing this to people is kind of, if anybody remembers Kenny Everett and his big hands, it's kind of like that. So that might be lost on a few of you. You might want to check it out later. What it is you have a software developer in my left hand who writes some code and wants to execute that code. And we have what's called the dispatcher, which is our scheduling piece of software. You register that code with the dispatcher as a container to execute. And what happens then is that you invoke that function on the dispatcher. The dispatcher is just a matching engine. I've got to be careful what I say here. It's under IP, and I'm going to get a telling off if I go too much further into this. But I can say that much. What it then does is it matches up that function to a GreenCloud member. So that is, that is those homes who are running on solar energy, who have computers attached to it. It's a lot to take in, so I'm just going to keep going, but I'm happy to field questions if you're really burning to ask them. So once the dispatcher gets your request, it finds an appropriate member to run that request on. The important bit that I always gloss over is members, people who can show to us that they are running on renewable energy. We pay them, all right? There's got to be an incentive for these people. It can't just be, oh, I'm doing a good thing for the planet. That's not enough. So we will pay people who sign up, become members, and register their devices on GreenCloud. I think that kind of covers it. So software developer asking the dispatcher to run some code, the member executes that code and sends it back to the software developer. The dispatcher is quite an important part of GreenCloud. It's the first part of security that we have to make sure you're not talking directly to people's computers. Right, so this is the kind of dry demo. We're going to jump tabs to a YouTube video that I recorded a couple of days ago. It's a couple of moments where I'm not quite set up, shall we say. But I'll just gloss over those. There's one point, we use Docker to run some of our code, and I'd forgotten to start Docker Desktop, so I had to go back and start that. But we'll get over that. So what we're looking at is the command line interface for GreenCloud, and this is me just showing you what it's got. You guys seeing this yet? And I'm gonna log in. So we use Java Web Tokens as our security, and it's just a base, straightforward login password. But that gives me a token then, and I can then use that token to interact with GreenCloud and create GreenCloud functions. So I've done that, I've got my token. What I'm now going to do is create a project. And it's quite simple, but we realized that when you have a problem that you want to fix or create, solve, you do that by creating a project, which is then a collection of functions that you'll run. All right? It's not always just one function that you're going to write. So that's what I'm doing here, just setting up the project. You can hear me typing actually. All right, so that's told the dispatcher that on my account, I've now got this project. And the next thing that I do is I go into that directory that it created for that project, and I'm going to create a Lambda. Lambda is just an interchangeable word for functions, or I'm pretty sure if you're familiar with AWS, you'll know that word. So what I'm doing here is I'm just showing the commands that Lambda's got. I'm starting to create one. I'm creating a Golang Lambda, and that's it now. GreenCloud knows that we've got that. I'm going into the function, and it's just got some boilerplate code. So we support, I think, 6 languages. I've got to keep up with myself there. And I'm just editing it to make it a little bit more appropriate for tonight, rather than just some code. So, as you can see, I'm a fan of Nano, not Vi, but that's personal choice, right? That's made that edit, and the next thing that you do is you build that Lambda. We've got quite a nice development process that we have. So this is where I'd not started Docker. So I'm like, right, better go and do that. But it was quite a nice test actually to see that, we've caught that caveat, and it carried on quite nicely once it had started up. Right, let's try again. I think I'm wondering whether it's actually started. Ah, there we go. All right, so remember what I said earlier, at this point, it's taking that code that we've just edited and it's converting that into a container. What it's doing though is it's building this locally. It's not actually sending it up to GreenCloud at this point. As a software developer, you like to start things off and make sure that they're in a good condition before you start going live. And this is, as you see, it says running localhost 8080. And if you actually visited that, oh yeah. So I'd forgotten at this point, so I've glossed over quite quickly, but I was trying to say that you can visit 8080, you can see that in action. What I'm trying to do now is actually run it in GreenCloud, but I've not actually deployed it. So I built it locally, but I hadn't sent it up to GreenCloud to invoke it. So that's what's going on here. And it goes through that process again, just to be sure it captures any changes that you might have made between the last time you built. And then it's sending that up to the registry, ready for us to then invoke it. So that takes a little bit of time. And then, once you've got it there, you can call that piece of code and execute it, which it will do in a second. Because this is recorded, I know it's going to work. All right, so this is me invoking the Lambda. Payload is just any inputs you want to pass in. We haven't got any for this. And there you go, that's the response. So it's worth just sort of saying what happened then. When we called invoke and passed, no parameters, that container was taken from GreenCloud registry.
Hello, we are GreenCloud Computing.
This is our explainer video. That's not me. And it takes that container and it downloads it onto a member's machine, executes it, gets the result, passes it back. And as you can see, it said, well, it didn't actually say Manchester, it said Manchester-y. I don't know if anybody noticed that, which is another little mess up by me. All right, how are we doing for time? All right? So, roadmap, where do we want to go? Well, we've nearly finished the server of GreenCloud. We see that there are potentials when we grow this idea to do things like database and storage. I think also that WebAssembly is a technology that we'd really like to look into because it's going to be a lot smaller, it's going to be a lot faster, and deployments like you saw there for the initial were a little bit slow. They were a couple of seconds to get going. But if you think about it, once you've done that first deployment, GreenCloud gets considerably faster, and we're looking at the moment about 500 millisecond response times. Lots of things going on to get that down. WebAssembly is part of that. So talked about WebAssembly, talked about storage and database. We're currently in a phase of taking customers on board. So GreenCloud's operational. We still have some kind of Heath Robertson areas that we need to address and solve, but it's getting there. So I think that's it. That kind of concludes what I wanted to say, and thank you very much for your time. Some questions? What?
Yeah, so you've got your members who have the solar panels on the roof. Are they also installing a GreenCloud server?
Yeah, that's something I glossed over, isn't it? So the idea is that you'll register on the website to become a member. That statistic about people who have got homes with solar installed came from a company called MCS. So they're a certification body in the UK. They've got an API that we will then call to check if the certification ID that we get back is actually valid to say, because obviously anybody could just join this thing, right? Once they've passed that and a couple of other details, they get access to a small VM, kind of like Firecracker, that has the GreenCloud node running in it. So that acquiesces when it's not being used, and then when it gets a request in from the dispatcher, fires itself up, gets to the container. If it doesn't have it already, executes it, shuts itself down. It's a little bit more than you asked, but I hope that gives a better picture. Chap at the back. It's a really good question, and I think I can add to this part that I've funded this all myself. So this is something that I'm completely in control with. And if I wanted to go against AWS and be cheaper, I could be. It's going to be a bit of a challenge to do something like that. And the pricing model is still something that we're working out. At the moment, people who are coming on board, we're saying 25 quid a month, as much processing power as you want. But we want to move that to a more of a pay-as-you-go model because we think that's fairer. And on that note, for the members, we're still working out what is a fair amount to pay from the revenue that we're getting in to the people who are providing the computing power. But there's some really good interest from people who are fitting solar. So I did a poll on a group recently and I got an 8% positive response. The other 20% thought it was just a Ponzi scheme, which I thought, fair enough, I could see why you might think that. But clearly it's not, and it's something I'm really passionate about and want to grow.
Is dealing with latency a big struggle, or is that?
That touches on the dispatcher a bit, which I've got to be careful about. But what I will say is that we've got a lot of ideas about how, if you have a request for minimal latency, how we're going to grow that area of GreenCloud. So the speeds that I've seen when we first got the technology going, without the bouncing backwards and forwards from the dispatcher, were incredibly fast. We've had to slow down a little bit, but we're really just on a path of getting faster now. So, go on.
Are there any plans to sort of use your own hardware in customers' premises? The supplier's premises. Seems like there's always a security risk if you're going to run on someone else's hardware.
Yeah, and that's something that we're working hard on to address people's concerns about being out in the wild, so to speak. And what we've got is the idea of having privileged GreenCloud and not so privileged. The idea of privilege is if you've got something that's incredibly sensitive to you, then you would run on our servers, okay? And our servers are run, they're actually in my garage because I know that that's running off renewable energy. But you can say, I want these to be privileged, that just works there, but we'll obviously charge you more for doing that because we want to encourage the member side of this to grow. And some people are quite happy to run stuff out in the wild. They're not bothered so much about security. Other people aren't. So that's kind of where we go with it.
If you're asking it to process images or something, it probably doesn't matter, but it's customer data, it will.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got to be very careful about that. Some people like to obfuscate their data so that that's not a problem. But there's all sorts of things. You've got to remember this is a completely vanilla platform, so people are going to do all sorts of things with it. One more? I can't hear you, sorry. When you say suppliers, do you mean people who are becoming members? Well, that's coming from the solar energy that people are providing. That's like the electrons that you produce, and so that's the assumption that we make, is that if your house is running off solar energy, so that's a really interesting question, and this is something I want to explore a little bit more with you if you've got a second. So obviously, like my house at the moment, sun's going down, lovely day it's been. The power that I'm getting is starting to drop off, okay? And so what we plan with GreenCloud is we've got a heartbeat that comes from the node, and that's constantly coming backwards and forwards to us, telling us that that person is in the cloud and they're producing energy, okay? When your inverter, a lot of inverters which take the energy and convert it from DC to AC, they're IP queryable. So you can actually talk to those and say, hey, am I producing energy? The easier one is batteries, because if you've got a battery and you've got stored energy, we can talk to those really easily. By the way, that's not a solved problem at the moment, and we've still got some work to do on that. But I do still think that we have got a really nice idea of a green solution for cloud computing. I think I better shut up, but come and grab me if you want to chat anymore. It's been great to speak to you.